Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Letourneau. I publish a newsletter called The Big Picture Speculator, and today I wanted to talk about the subject of peak oil, and I titled my talk, Do You Believe We're Running Out of Oil? Because a lot of people think that we're running out of oil immediately, and I'd like to point out that there's lots of evidence that we have lots of oil and there's good living in it, and so along the way I'll point out some potential supplies of oil and also some investment opportunities that go along with it. The thing about peak oil people is they tend to be pessimists, and pessimists are great if you're borrowing money from them because they never expect to get it back. But in terms of moving the world forward, sometimes pessimists can create a lot of unnecessary fear. So when it comes to the global conventional oil endowment, most studies say 6 to 10 trillion barrels. Unconventional oil endowment, 6 to 8 trillion barrels. So far, in the history of mankind, we've only produced 1.2 trillion barrels of oil. So I'd like to say peak oil will happen eventually, and I'll also say that high energy costs are going to kill economic growth, but we don't have to run around in panic about running out of oil immediately. Peak oil was developed by M. King Hubbert. He was a geophysicist with Shell, a very bright man. But his peak oil theory assumed a couple of constants, and the most important one was that technology remained constant. And I'll show a few examples today where horizontal drilling and fracturing, deep offshore drilling, and improved oil recovery are all ways that we're going to be able to produce more oil. If there was ever a great example as to the effect of human ingenuity on the production of hydrocarbons, I believe shale gas is probably the best one. 5 years ago, there was a lot of concern about North American natural gas supplies. Anybody who was working in unconventional gas, the vast majority of people were working on coal bed methane. And out of the blue from work that was being done on the Barnett Shale in Texas, a whole new play type came out, and all you have to do is look at the natural gas supply. We were so successful in finding new supplies of natural gas that it's actually turned into a pretty tough business to make a living in. Ultimately, that's the curse of any resource-based investing, is if you're really successful and find a lot of the commodity in question, the price goes down, and suddenly it's not that interesting of an investment. Anybody who talks about peak oil will rarely talk about peak natural gas, because we really don't know how much natural gas we have. Even in the United States, which is the most heavily explored country on Earth, suddenly it's looking like they've got, a secure, reliable, long-term supply of natural gas, and that was unthinkable 5 years ago. So that's one of the examples I like to use about when people start getting worried about peak oil. That shale gas is a great example that ingenuity does prevail. Since we're talking specifically more on the oil side, here's a few examples, and the big hot oil player right now is the Bakken, and this is in the Williston Basin in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, north of South Dakota and Montana. And this graph here just shows North Dakota oil production since 1970. And you could argue that peak oil happened in 1984 in North Dakota. But then along came production from the Bakken in 2005 that really shot up their production levels. And this is a direct result of two technologies, horizontal drilling and then multi-stage fracking in horizontal wells. And there's a lot of opportunity with the Bakken play in the Williston Basin. Slide 6 shows an outline of the Bakken, where it is. And this was not a new discovery. This was a technology play, basically. There were lots of wells that had drilled through the Bakken. People knew what it looked like. People could put their hands on it in core. But it was the advent of technology and applying it properly to these tight oil-bearing rocks that really made the play economic. And the big player in the Bakken in Canada is Crescent Point Energy, symbol CPG.TO. And if you want more information, you can click on the USGS link on some of their research as to what the ultimate potential of the Bakken is. Another place to find large oil discoveries and a truly amazing technological wonder is offshore Brazil in the Santos Basin, where in 2 to 3 kilometers of water, they're drilling through another 2 to 3 kilometers of rock and 2,000 meters of salt, and these wells are finding several billion barrels of oil at a time. That Santos Basin offshore Brazil could potentially lead to 80 billion barrels of oil. Now, it's expensive, obviously, because of the depth, and they have to build a pipeline, and there's a lot of cost involved, but it does show that, this deep offshore basin was previously inaccessible. Slide 8 just shows Brazil crude oil production by year, and that's only up to 2006. These new offshore discoveries haven't even been included in their production profile yet. And I think that's something to be aware of, is that there are new petroleum provinces to this day still being found. Slide 9, this shows a map of Kurdistan. And Kurdistan is not the most friendly place in the world. It's bordered by Syria, Turkey, and Iran, but it is one of the cheapest places on Earth with the lowest geological risk to find large oil accumulations. And this map shows in the orange a supergiant oil field with over 5 billion barrels of reserves and lots of other oil fields along that trend. A couple examples of what can happen in Kurdistan. Heritage Oil discovered 2.3 to 4.2 billion barrels of oil with a single well. The cost of these wells is definitely under $100 million in most cases. So there's a huge upside in the discoveries. And what they're saying is they'll be able to recover 50 to 70% of that oil. A different well drilled by Gulf Keystone proved up 1 to 5.3 billion barrels of original oil in place, and they're estimating that they can recover 30 to 35% of that oil. So the key takeaway here is that with a single well that is a lot cheaper than drilling offshore Brazil, you can find billion-barrel fields fairly routinely. There are very large structures that haven't been tested in Kurdistan. However,